It is a sound to cherish. It is the sound of hope.
The discoveries continue now on BBC Wales on 1, and how about a quick drink before lunch? A drop of real ale, perhaps. And Cinderella thought they were only good for making coaches.
Around harvest time, this is not the reverence with which most people treat their pumpkins. But take heart, this pumpkin does not die in vain.
Very good cause. Something you'll enjoy.
Something made of hops and yeast. Something Bill Evans brews. Pumpkin ale.
I feel like a chef. In the brewing business, there's chemists and there's chefs. I'm a chef, I'm not a chemist.
Bill's been making beer since his college days. First as a hobby, then as a business. He's one of only a few pub owners in this country making their own brew.
I don't brew for the customer. I feel the customer's basically wrong. I let the customer come in, and if he doesn't like my beer, he can go down the street to another place. I'm proud of what I do.
If Bill sounds like a temperamental artist, it's no accident. And if this apparatus reminds you of a dark room, that's no accident either. See, before he became a brewer, Bill used to be a photographer, even published several books, including this one, Suburbia. There is a link.
As a photographer, you shoot the film, you process it, and you make prints. As a brewer, I'm taking barley, hops, water, and yeast, and I'm making beer.
Which is more rewarding?
I would say it's more rewarding to be making the beer.
His reward flows from the tap. A hearty brew, unfiltered, unpasteurized, 4% alcohol, and according to customers, the real stuff.
Buzz.
One pumpkin yields 888 bottles, $100 in ingredients, $3,000 worth of beer. And with plenty of people willing to drink it, that's artistic satisfaction a man can taste.
They want a new face. Temporary assignment. It's up your neck of the woods.
If you're another one of those Geordie coppers, how they might fill your lot for one day.
I said, what's your name?
We have a man in a wheelchair strumming a banjo. An officer of the law who looks like he belongs with destitute winos, and a convicted felon.
Who are you?
Don't you recognize me in the daylight?
Back on the Tyne, the original Spender series, tomorrow 9:15 on BBC1.
Details of forthcoming BBC programmes, together with background information, features and listings, can be found in the new issue of Radio Times. Dorothy returns to Ramsay Street in 35 minutes, hoping for a quiet and uneventful rest. How wrong could she be? You're watching BBC Wales on 1.
Good afternoon. A Commons motion has been tabled calling for the resignation of 2 of the Welsh Development Agency's former top men from their current posts. It follows yesterday's report by the influential Public Accounts Committee, which attacked the way the agency has been run.
The damning report from the PAC detailed a series of scandals and said there were inexcusable breaches of control and accountability. Now a group of 8 Welsh Labour MPs...
I'm sorry, I have problems on that report. We'll try and get back to it. The National Rivers Authority is recommending improved river defences in North Wales to avoid a repeat of last month's severe flooding. Tim Hartley reports.
3,000 people had to be moved from their homes at Llandudno as the floodwater ran amok. Businesses and homes were damaged as the River Wyddern burst its banks. In West Wales, Cardigan was flooded as the Muldown Brook too became overwhelmed. Today's Flood Defence Committee heard these were freak conditions, but it said that £200,000 should be spent on defences along the banks of the Weathen in North Wales.
It was a freak storm, and the only thing that we can do is to ensure that our existing defences are up to the standards that we think are reasonable and appropriate, and make sure that everything is operating correctly in terms of its maintenance.
And we can go back to that report now about the Commons motion which has been tabled calling for the resignation of two of the Welsh Development Agency's former top men from their current posts. It follows yesterday's report by the influential Public Accounts Committee, which attacked the way the agency has been run.
The damning report from the PAC detailed a series of scandals and said there were inexcusable breaches of control and accountability. Now a group of 8 Welsh Labour MPs have tabled a Commons motion calling for former WDA Chief Dr Gwyn Jones to stand down from his other public positions, which include the chair of the Broadcasting Council for Wales. But a top Welsh industrialist says Dr Jones's good work should not be overlooked.
He done a cracking job in terms of marketing, selling and promoting Wales. I've seen him stand up on a stage, having been going for something like 12 to 14 hours, and make a speech and get 400 Japanese businessmen all really excited about the prospects of coming to Wales.
The Commons motion is also calling for the WDA's ex-deputy chairman, Sir Donald Walters, to resign his chairmanship of the Llandoch Hospital Trust.
A report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate into Gwen Police says that financial cuts imposed on the force will have an adverse effect in many areas. The report says if underfunding continues, the Chief Constable John Over will be put in an impossible position and the force's efficiency may be undermined. Recruitment, training and technology are said to be at risk. And that's it for now. More news at 10 to 4 on BBC Wales on 2.
Boris Yeltsin thanks the world's richest nations for promising money, but says he needs it now. Good afternoon. As the G7 leaders confirmed their financial package for Moscow, they painted a depressing picture of economic health in their own countries. The other headlines, a row after this couple is told that they are too racially naive to adopt a child. And the mystery surrounding the death of the last tsar has been cleared up by British scientists.
We are 98.5% certain that this is the Romanov family.
Boris Yeltsin has accused the world's richest nations of being too slow to lift trade barriers imposed against Russia during the Soviet era. But he welcomed the $3 billion package agreed by the G7 leaders at their summit in Tokyo to help his privatization program. The summit ended with a statement from the G7 leaders that unemployment in their countries is at an unacceptable level. It called for lower interest rates and more flexible job markets to help growth.
7 world leaders, all of them facing varying degrees of political crisis at home, were today joined by an 8th who would happily swap his problems for all of theirs. He was looking for more than just a pat on the back.
Russia needs to be integrated into the world system. This is vital. It's essential. It's easier to talk than to take action, but we need material assistance, be it bilateral or multilateral.
President Clinton explained why it's in the interest of the West to support the man who still controls almost as many nuclear weapons as he does.
All these things will help Americans to do more business in Russia and will help Russia to succeed in a way that will continue the path charted by the end of the Cold War. Fewer nuclear weapons, fewer defense investments, more opportunities to invest in people and jobs and a peaceful future.
Even if it was the debt-ridden aiding the bankrupt, the G7 did offer Russia $3 billion of support for the restructuring of their economy and the privatization of the old state enterprises. Later, they hope to replace aid with trade. The Japanese Prime Minister, as host, read out the official conclusion of the summit, known as the Economic Declaration.
We are particularly concerned with the level of unemployment. More than 23 million people are unemployed in our countries. That is unacceptable.
The G7 ruled out, for all except the Japanese, cutting unemployment by old-fashioned reflation. That's bigger budget deficits. The main hope is now placed on lower interest rates and more flexible labour markets. It would be easy to list the problems this summit has not solved. But the summit is not a world government. It's just a meeting of world leaders trying to minimize conflict and misunderstanding between them. And judged by that standard, the breakthrough on world trade, the focus on unemployment and the support for President Yeltsin add up to the most concretely successful summit for 15 years and to personal successes for President Clinton and John Major. Peter Jay, BBC News, Tokyo.
And the Prime Minister said the summit had been productive and better than he'd expected. But he said all the leading economies, except Japan, would have to take hard decisions to cut their budget deficits. And he conceded that it had been a rough old 12 months for the economy here.
Mr. Major and his fellow summit leaders, who were dead on arrival in Tokyo, according to one German authority, have proved there is life after death. But if Mr. Major had had some success in Tokyo, as in pushing the British agenda at the latest EC summit, he hasn't yet convinced the electorate in Britain, where polls make him the most unpopular Prime Minister ever and have relegated the Tories to third place behind the Liberal Democrats.
I seem to recall during the last election answering an awful lot of questions about opinion polls. I also seem to recall what the election result was like. And none of the opinion polls remotely got near to the result as it actually turned out to be when people had to make their decision.
The Prime Minister argues that the economy is coming right and that economic achievements have been masked by sensational events.
What has been happening is that inflation has fallen to 1.25%, interest rates have fallen to 6%, our exports are proceeding at record levels, and quite contrary to the expectations of most experts, unemployment didn't reach 3 million and has fallen for each of the last 4 months. If I had predicted that to you in an interview 6 months ago, most people watching the interview would have said I'd taken leave of my senses, but that is the reality.
But Mr. Major warns too that there are stark decisions to come about tackling Britain's social security bill.
Over time, we have to bring that back. It isn't a question suddenly of immediate draconian and panic changes. It's a question of recognizing a long-term problem and beginning to take action to bring it back into balance. And that's what we have to do. It will take time.
For the Prime Minister, things could yet get worse before they get better. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Tokyo.
The next test of the government's popularity will be the Christchurch by-election in 3 weeks' time. The Conservatives held the seat with a majority of over 20,000 at the general election, but as the three major parties launched their campaigns this morning, the Liberal Democrats looked well placed to challenge them.
Christchurch is a peaceful, picturesque place, but the Liberal Democrats hope voters here will give the government its latest jolt and its name will join their string of by-election victories. But the Tory party chairman is brushing aside defeatist talk and poor polls.
I'm not cast down by the opinion polls. I mean, in a sense, we're comfortable with the position where the opinion polls show us as underdogs as far as the elections are concerned at the moment, because that's exactly where we were in 1992.
A breakfast with local business leaders meant the opposition parties had an early start to their first full day of campaigning. The Tories didn't make it, arguing it could contravene election law, and anyway it clashed with their timetable. Labour made the most of it.
Well, I've just seen Norman Fowler doing an interview for the cameras just outside this building. And it's a calculated insult to the small businessman inside the building that he's not prepared to walk through the door and say hello to them. It is a dramatic example of the way in which the Conservatives have lost the support of small businesses, that they're not prepared to talk to them.
Those at the breakfast, many of them Conservative supporters, did seem fed up with the state of the government.
Everything's so muddled at the moment that people have lost confidence. As fast as one issue is raised, something else is raised, and no one knows what to think.
And you feel that even though you'll be voting Conservative?
Yeah.
The Tories are going to be defeated, which is a shame, but I think really that's the state of the world economy.
A third of the population are retired. VAT on fuel is a big issue. The Tories accuse their main opponents of running scare stories.
You don't have to scare the old people. They are scared. They're scared that the government, which many of them helped to elect, are now pursuing policies which are going to lower their quality and standard of life.
If the Liberal Democrats did take this seat, the government would probably avoid some of the more dramatic political effects of defeat. By election night, MPs will be on their summer holidays and less inclined to panic. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Christchurch.
An Asian woman and her white husband have been told by Norfolk Social Services they cannot adopt a child of mixed race because they are racially naive. Roma and Jim Lawrence, who live in Cromer, had told social workers assessing them for adoption that they had experienced no racial abuse in their hometown.
With their own very different backgrounds, Jim and Roma Lawrence thought they were ideally suited to adopt a mixed-race child. They were able to offer a comfortable and loving environment at their home in Cromer, where he runs a successful publishing business and she's a part-time nurse.
We were really enthusiastic. We had no reason to think that we were going to be turned down. So I was really excited.
But after social workers had subjected them to an elaborate vetting procedure, they were rejected. The letter said their expectations for any adopted child would be unrealistic, and that they had a lack of understanding of racial issues.
I couldn't get over the sheer cheek of it, that a panel of white people with no experience of race whatsoever would have the audacity to tell an Asian woman that she is naive about race.
Norfolk Social Services say they can't comment on individual cases, but claim the social workers in this instance were experienced. The Health Department has called for the papers in this case, but the reaction to the first reports reflects ministerial concern.
I'm concerned that when I hear of reasons given to put obstacles in the way of adoption, which seem to me to be nonsense, that when they seem to be ideologically nonsense, when they seem to be based on political correctness rather than the interests of children, that is not the place for such ideology.
But there was support for social workers from the adoption agency's national body.
Racism is one of the issues that one does need to address, but that isn't about being politically correct. It's about trying to ensure that when a child is placed, it's placed in a family that's able to support it if it meets racist attitudes at school or wherever.
That will be little consolation for Jim and Roma Lawrence, who believe social workers wanted them to be obsessed about racism. Instead, they found a contented couple. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
Well, a short while ago I spoke to David Wright, who's the Director of Social Services for Norfolk County Council, and I asked him why the decision was taken to turn the Lawrences down.
Well, I'm not able to talk about the particular case, but I think what has misled the public is that they think we are turning people down as prospective adopters on the basis of an issue to do with race, which isn't in any way the case in any of the situations we're evaluating.
Well, can you explain why you have made the decision?
What we do is to look at every aspect of each of a couple's personality, history and attitude towards adoption. We look at the couple's joint approach and views on the prospect of adopting. We look at the couple's expectations of adoptive children and understanding of what their needs are, which might be and are certainly beyond the needs of naturally born children, because obviously they have natural parents with whom they might, for example, want to make contacts.
Don't you think this could be an example of the rules being brought into disrepute because they weren't exercised with common sense?
Absolutely, if this was the only factor that we will consider in a prospective adopter's background, but that isn't the case. We always explore all the issues. It is but one matter which we have to thoroughly investigate.
So you feel Norfolk Social Services have nothing to apologise for?
I feel very sad that the adopters have taken this decision particularly badly, and we've in fact offered them help if they would like to consider adopting a child from abroad, for example. They would need to go through an adoption agency, and we've offered them help to find an independent adoption agency that would give them a new view.
More than 70 prisoners are in control of part of the maximum security shots jail near Glasgow. 7 prison officers were injured. 1 has stab wounds after the disturbance in D Wing last night. Officials have now regained control of the dining hall. 34 inmates gave themselves up. Negotiations are continuing with those still holding out.
31 prisoners returned to their cells during the night, and a team of trained prison negotiators is now talking to the 74 still barricaded in D Hall. They're trying to find out what the protest is about, but so far there's little indication.
We don't know as yet, but we have made contact with them, and dialogue is continuing with the inmates in D Hall, and we're hopeful of a peaceful solution to the incident.
Is it all quiet inside?
Yes, it is.
2 of the 7 injured prison officers are still in hospital. 1 with stab wounds is stable, the other satisfactory. So far, damage has been confined to D Hall. It's the 6th time, trouble has flared since the prison, Scotland's showpiece jail, opened at a cost of £15 million in 1987. The prisoners not involved in the dispute have been allowed to shower and eat, but are now confined to their cells. A decision on prison visiting will be made later this afternoon. Paddy Christie, BBC News, Shotts.
Armed police are resuming a search in southwest Scotland for a gunman who shot dead a German tourist and seriously injured his wife and daughter. The attack happened at the family's motor caravan parked near Stranraer in Dumfries and Galloway. Police centred their intensive search for the gunman on Cairn Ryan. Traffic in and out of the area is being checked. The condition of the mother has worsened overnight and she's said to be critical. Her daughter is serious but stable. The 15-year-old son who raised the alarm has told police the killer is grey-haired, in his 40s and has a beer belly. Another 286 jobs are to go at the Swanhunty Shipyard on Tyneside. The yard went into receivership after it lost a multi-million-pound contract to build a helicopter carrier. Over 2,000 jobs are under threat. The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd says talks on the return of Hong Kong to China should speed up following his meetings with Chinese leaders in Peking this morning. Mr. Hurd met the Chinese President and Foreign Minister in an effort to break the deadlock in negotiations. He now believes both sides will move on with a more positive attitude.
These were the first formal talks between Douglas Hurd and his Chinese counterpart Chen Qi-chun since the row erupted last October over the Hong Kong Governor Chris Patton's plans for democratic reform in the colony. In this same state guest house, Chinese and British officials have been holding unproductive talks for more than 2 months now to try and resolve the dispute. At a news conference, Mr. Hurd had no news of any breakthrough, except to say that China had approved another key part of Hong Kong's controversial airport project.
There was no discussion of deadlines on either side. What there was agreement that the pace of the negotiations should be sustained, indeed accelerated, and that the two foreign ministers would meet again in September.
As a gesture of goodwill, the Chinese granted Mr. Hurd an unscheduled meeting with the President Jiang Zemin. But the Foreign Secretary didn't say whether China now agreed that Hong Kong's elections should be, as Britain insists, fair, open and acceptable to the people of Hong Kong. The Peking Mr. Hurd had a chance to glimpse during his less than 24-hour visit is a city that's changed considerably since his last trip 2 years ago. An economic boom is now underway thanks to the embrace of capitalist methods. Here in Peking, China is planning next week to hold the inaugural meeting of a special committee to prepare for Hong Kong's handover. Whatever Mr. Hurd may have achieved by his visit, the setting up of this committee is a sign of China's belief that cooperation can never be fully restored. James Miles, BBC News, Peking.
The President of Bosnia, Alija